Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. As always, this is your captain, Randy Wright speaking, and I'd like to take this opportunity to personally thank you for choosing to fly over the friendly airwaves with us here at our state-of-the-art radio program, Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Well, folks, without any further ado, let's go ahead and delve into the topic I have selected for this program. With respect to the balkanization in America, when we look at the way President Joe Biden just recently said that he wouldn't trust the outcomes of the 2022 midterm elections because of the failure of the Democrats to pass their quote-unquote voting rights thing, their voting rights legislation, I noticed a historical trend, something developing within America that should be rather frightening. I know that Tim Pool and certain others like to sit there and talk about civil war brewing in America. But if we are to have a civil war, and if we are to have conflict of that nature and that scale, it is not going to be like the previous civil war that we had, the one from 1861 to 65, because it won't be split geographically. It will be a war wholly based on ideology, a war wholly based on politics, and it will be based on a claim of integrity of elections. We already know that at least on the right, there are claims, whether they're warranted or not, of integrity issues with the 2020 election. And as I've already mentioned here, we had Biden saying that the midterm elections this year are up to be questioned. Now, of course, Jen Psaki, his press secretary, had immediately rushed out to do damage control and to claim that no, there isn't any question as to the election integrity. But yes, there is, based off of his own statements. But this is the duplicitous aspect of it, so that they can basically speak from both sides of their mouth and to sit there and claim that things are as normal, as per normal. But are they really? I don't think so. I don't think so, because I think there is political points to be earned here. And of course, why would this create a problem with both sides being able to claim that there's some sort of lacking of integrity with respect to the whole electoral process? Well, it's because both sides can justify a claim of the stolen election. And at the same time, this allows them to eliminate any ground that might have existed as common ground between both the left and the right. Now, it's very simplistic to look at it as just two polar ends on a line. Politically speaking, that's never how it works, and there will be factions. And I've always said that if the Civil War is to come, if there is to be a division, it's going to be like the Spanish Civil War. That was between, 1934 and 36. I mean, it was 3-year war, basically 33 to 36 was when the Spanish Civil War happened. And just like the Spanish Civil War, any conflict that would exist here would be on a basis of differing factions. On the nationalist side, you had the Carlists, you had the Falange. Carlists, of course, were a separatist group, much like the Basques, which were on the leftist or Spanish Republican side. And then you had the Falange, which were your fascists. And then there was the Theta, which was this Christian right. Think of it as almost like a social Christian right. So it would be left-wing compared to the other members of that faction, but it was still kind of a nationalist group. And it's weird that a separatist Carlist group would be part of that, because they had their own king, their own separate identity, much like the Basques, but they saw the religious aspect of the nationalist cause in Spain to be something to unify behind. And all of these divisions were based on political affiliation as opposed to geographical. And on the Republican side, you had the anarcho-syndicalists, basically your anarchists. You had communists, socialists, and the Basque separatist movement. And so it was a strange hodgepodge of groups that you wouldn't normally consider to be allied with one another. And yes, you're starting to see that here in America as well. Look at the disillusioned leftists, or disillusioned liberals rather, more appropriate than leftists. Certain left-leaning libertarian types coming to the right, or being forced to the right due to cancel culture and the various attempts to silence any opposition by the more radical fringes of the left. There's infighting in that way, and so it is creating odd or strange alliances that wouldn't have otherwise existed in the past. And that's very similar to what happened in Spain. And so what caused all of this, and what similarities do arise with respect to that? Well, like the Spanish Civil War and America at present, there have been rapid shifts between political extremes during two elections. Now, Spain was a little different in that they had been a monarchy until about 1930. And then, all of a sudden, the monarchy collapsed. The Spanish Republic came into existence in 1931. It had proclaimed itself as the Niña Bonita, or the beautiful little girl. But it became exceedingly unstable because there had been promises made by the quote-unquote popular front, the leftist front, sort of like what we're getting with Biden, where they said, oh, well, you'll have land reform, we'll basically redistribute land, we will give workers new rights, we will create strong labor unions, and we will punish the pre-existing system so that this new system can arise. And it's what they did. And that was basically your claims of oppression and manipulation. Now, of course, that led to reactions on the right, particularly within the Spanish military, because they saw that the left was viewing them as being corrupt. But not all of the military. The military was split too. Kind of like what we're seeing here with General Miley and all of the stuff that's been happening with critical race theory and the left's push for identity politics. There was also distrust of social traditions. The left in the Popular Front in Spain, Republican Spain, viewed the church as being autocratic and allied with the right, yet they ignored their members that were still loyal to the church, because the church had been a very central and key component of Spanish history. And it's kind of like what you have with the Latin Americans turning against the Democrats to a degree because of their hatred of religion, hatred of tradition, hatred of families, hatred of all of the things that would play in, such as the Latinx thing, the Latinx, or however that's pronounced, that Latin Americans absolutely hate. Well, it plays into that too. In Spain, you had the burning of monasteries, you had these riots against the church, and the police basically stood down on orders of their politicians. That starts to sound a bit like what we saw here during the Summer of Love after the death of St. Fentanyl Floyd. And that was all part of it. At the same time, the Republic in Spain was trying to rewrite their history. And so what you saw was both sides had splintered between competing factions which were looking to redefine the role of government. Because both sides were starting to view the government as ineffectual, the government as being unable to support the needs of average Spaniards. And so that's exactly what the left and right were facing. And so gradually, as hatred and animosity grew between them, they started to unite around a central enemy. Now, on the left, in Spain, much like here, the media was spurred on through propaganda to draw them together, to preach a simplified narrative that would allow them to demonize their opposition and basically falsify the similarities between each other. And of course, the mutual distrust that existed on both sides is much like what we see with the distrust of both sides today in America. So, long-standing hatreds that had existed for centuries in Spain, and not so much centuries here, but we being a younger nation can have those flames of animus fanned, led to ever stauncher stances on both sides with an evaporation of any middle ground. So there was no moderation that was available. And so, with each election that they had, it was adding fuel to the fire. And that was why you had the police ignoring violence, and then the police even turning and starting to engage in violence. Much like you had with some of the coup responses here, and some of the responses that, like at the January 6th incident. These are the same types of things that happened in Spain. And so it really reached a point where it was such an unavoidable thing that bitter hostilities broke out. And just like here in Spain, there was that distrust of elections. So after the Popular Front failed with respect to their collectivization of private property, more of the anarcho-syndicalists and socialists started to push for the reform. This also left the government reeling, and the more left-wing parts of their parliamentary government refused to join it, causing further collapse within the Republic. So, when the right did start to gain control and to use the parliamentary process to roll back the more radical changes that had been implemented, the left then unified against the right. And so it was all manipulated, all controlled by propaganda, much like what we're having in America right now. And it's dangerous. It is truly dangerous, because when the left unified, they targeted the military, particularly those officers they saw as being opposed to the more radical Popular Front initiatives of the Republic. This is like how you saw Biden essentially saying anyone in the military who has a Gadsden flag or anything of that nature is against his regime, and the left is looking to go out and punish them. This is the same line of thought, the same basic approach. Now in Spain, was the army that revolted. Yet, the initial revolt was premature because the right hadn't unified like the left had, and so they weren't ready to discard with the parliamentary response. That, however, emboldened the left and the countryside throughout Spain to assert their dominance and to start rounding up people and start killing landowners. And so it plunged it further into unavoidable conflict. And so the country was tearing itself apart at that point. And so the similarities of the ripples that were in Spain leading up to the Civil War are here now. They are threatening to boil over in modern America. And it is dangerous because if we have this shared hatred of the opposition, which I am seeing, it will reach a point to where there is no way around it, that it becomes unavoidable. And as I've been saying all along here, we are split on the political spectrum. Yet the differences that exist within both sides have really prevented unifying. But the statements that were made by Biden at his press conference, where he was saying that the results of this year's midterm elections, before they've even happened, could be suspect or tainted, that throws the door open for further radicalization. And when that happens, there will be this idea that the other side is an enemy. And we're already seeing it, and it's already consolidating. It's already becoming worse. And it's as though we have blinded ourselves to the lessons of history. But the question is, can we prevent it from happening? Can we prevent this from happening? Maybe. Possibly. It's hard to know. It's hard to know because we aren't taking the time to pause and reflect upon it and to consider whether these actions have led us to the unavoidable. And so this, again, is why, yes, it is important for us to participate in the midterm elections this year, and it's important for us to reflect upon how we can find common ground again, while also not surrendering the time-honored values, institutions, and traditions that have defined us, and while never surrendering our constitutional approach. That is what we must do. And I think we can do it, but it's fast approaching the point of no return. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you again for choosing to fly over the friendly airwaves with us here at the Wright Flyer. I hope to see you again next time. Please do take care. See you next time.